like you get to look into companies that are building like agricultural robots, and you get to find out how they're doing it. And sometimes you get to find them. You find that they do things that are really weird sometimes, and sometimes things that don't really make sense. And sometimes you can contribute ideas because we've seen more than they have in many regards. Like maybe they've been a lot deeper on these areas, but we've been a lot broader. So we can give them like insights into like, have you ever heard of this toolbox? And they're like, we've been implementing this from scratch. We didn't even know it existed because we didn't know what terms were to use to search for this thing, right? So these things happen so often, and that's the fun part where people can see the magic and they're like, oh my goodness, you're starting to help me.
Welcome to Making Progress, where we showcase our members and visitors of our coworking community. And I'll be your host, Leon Pauls. I forgot last time.
You say Little Pauls?
Leon Pauls.
Okay, cool.
My name is Little Pauls. No, Leon Pauls. And today I'm excited to introduce you to David Asabina. David, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Could you briefly introduce yourself for the audience?
All right, briefly. David Asabina, currently associate partner at Philipps Byrne. We do a lot of technical due diligence for investors, mostly VCs and private equity companies. And I've been building tech for as long as I can remember. A bit of a generalist, so I've been building hardware, robots, I've been training machine learning models, I've been writing software, apps, web stuff, all of the stuff I've touched once, so master of none, jack of all trades, right? The jack of all trades, master of none, I guess.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think, so that's quite fast.
I'm sorry, you said like short, briefly.
Briefly, not fast.
Shall I do it again?
No, I think what the audience probably missed is what you do at the.
So we do technical due diligence, which means that we, on behalf of investors, go look at startups and get to understand whether the technology they're building is sound and if they can kind of like deliver on the promises they're making in their pitch decks. So often they're talking about, we're going to scale like this. And then we go in and try to figure out, can you really scale like that? And sometimes find things that kind of like tell you that they're not really ready. So you can kind of like manage expectations. And it's a good and bad story at the same time, right? So the good side of it is that people get aligned and then all of a sudden the investor knows like, I should probably give you a bit more budget so you can hire the right people now that I understand. Sometimes it's like, maybe I have to like discount the price of the ticket because what I'm seeing there doesn't align with what I was looking for. So, but at least people are aligned. Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. So can you share me or with us a bit about your background? Because we go way back. I've known you for more than a decade now.
Yeah, true. Bit about my background. So, how far do we go back? So I've been tinkering with computers ever since I can remember. So I bought one of my dad's old computers back in Suriname because I wasn't allowed to work on the real computer that was used for like word processing and like office stuff. And I've started programming then, tinkering with Linux. Mandrake Linux was kind of like a thing back in the day. QBasic was one of my first languages along with Perl and Visual Basic 6. And then I kind of like figured out like, okay, the computer stuff I have a handle on, the electrical engineering stuff was like black magic to me. So I went to university here in the Netherlands to learn that. In between, I did a little stint at a gold mine to save money to come over to the Netherlands. Yeah, but it's not what you think it is. It was me on quads and driving a Land Rovers, patching cables and setting up radio links. So I was like an IT tech. So it's not the image you would have about being in a gold mine, like running around, standing next to these massive trucks.
It still sounds amazing. Like driving quads
like,
and
it was wild.
So how did you? Okay, so then from that, I think we met roughly 11 years ago at the Lean Startup workshops that we did. Exactly. So how did you end up there? Like why leave that behind and move forward with?
So I wanted to study engineering here. So I basically came to the Netherlands to study electrical engineering. Sad story, good story, dropped out of TU Delft because like I didn't have the right like connection. I was about to say Anschluss, but that's the German word. But I didn't have the right like prerequisite from Suriname. So they said, go do your propedeuse at the hogeschool. Went there, loved it. Hogeschool is Applied Sciences University for the Anglophones that are watching. And I knew that I wanted to do startups. I've been like dreaming about Silicon Valley for as long as I can remember, and I've been super like excited about tech. So the natural thing for me was to like try to end up in the whole startup thing. Yeah. So already after uni, or even while I was at uni, I was already like diving into kind of like the ecosystem. And when I graduated, I kind of like went full force into it. The rest is history.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow. So how did you end up at a co-working space like 11 years ago?
Here.
Like, why did you go
Because I met you at this bar. Like you and Raymond, I met at a bar. We basically hit it off. And basically from that point on, I kept following what was happening. The co-working space happened, part of the fam. I just rolled into it. And that was kind of like the connection.
One of the OGs.
Yeah. And I think that bar thing happened because I spotted some event on meetup.com when Meetup was still hotter than Luma.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
We did meetups.
Exactly. And that's basically how I got into the co-working community here.
So, but why did you join? Like, why do you go to a co-working space?
Oh, because I was going to like meetups left and right that were tech oriented. I would go to Den Haag. There would be like what is it? Hacker spaces. That would be like just getting together, tinkering. I would go to Amsterdam to like, at the time you had like Amsterdam. The Amsterdam thing was going on at the time. Yeah. So there was a lot of that going on. I would go to Eindhoven. Eindhoven. Because I would just wanted to connect with folks. I want to hear what's going on, what cool folks are building, and potentially like collaborate on things. So that was the reason for
that. Happened as well, right? Did you go to Startup Bootcamp?
I did. I went to Startup Bootcamp. I met my co-founders through the co-working space that you organized, right? Then I ended up on Startup Bus. I ended up getting projects in Germany. My first projects in Germany came through my Startup Bus adventure. And then from that, I just almost kept traveling around like a mercenary with my duffel bag doing odd projects. That was basically it. Yeah.
I recall you were with us in Cyprus and we were driving in a convertible and you were on the back seat reading a book.
Oh, yeah.
So like I have never seen, and this is not a joke, like I've never seen someone more dedicated to learning or motivated or than you. So what I wonder is like what motivates you to have this energy and passion for picking up a book and diving into new topics and just
pretty simple. I am not that smart, so I like this. So I figured that out early enough, and I think that makes me quite anxious, and that has basically like primed me to constantly be on the hunt.
Constantly be learning.
Yeah.
Play catch up.
Absolutely.
I don't think that's true though. But
like in my head, it's not true. There's always someone smarter, right? So like the folks that I take as a reference are way out there, and that's not where the mean is, obviously. But like that's kind of like my reference point. I want to be able to converse with like folks like Ilya Sutskever on like a peer level. I'm not quite there yet, so I need to work to be able to do that. At some point, it would be the dream that you can kind of like be contributing to like frontier level research, right? You need
so where does this come from, this drive?
Probably my they have this complex I don't know what the name for that is. My recall is failing me now, but the imposter syndrome thing. I have like I'm a big like sufferer of this thing, so I'm constantly feeling like I don't know enough. Maybe it's a good thing because I think the side effect of that is that I'm constantly learning, so it naturally drives me to do something that is not negative for me. So this is probably a core driver. Also, I just want to build a lot of cooler things than the things that I'm maybe building right now. And for that, I need to be a lot smarter. Maybe not true. Like a lot of founders are not that. I mean, they're smart people.
I think if you're a good leader, you can already
exactly. You don't have to be like the chief scientist, right? You can be a good leader with completely different set of qualities. So, but I do enjoy the idea of being able to understand at a basic level what is happening in tech.
Yeah. So apart from like constantly learning, so do you set goals or like how do you set your goals? Like personally, business wise?
Yeah. I am not, I wouldn't say that I'm a good example of how to set goals. So I have like smaller like goals on a yearly basis that I'm trying to pursue. Like some of them are like a lot of them are not necessarily professional. Like they're very private goals. In terms of optimizing for relationships, that's probably one of my primary things where I optimize for relationships. I optimize for learning in domains that I think are relevant, which is a constant struggle because this shifts a bit So very often, every few years, I'm kind of like shuffling my energy levels to like focus on, okay, maybe now quantum computing, or maybe now generative AI. Like, what are the architectures that are leading, and why are they so significant? What's the intuition behind it? Tomorrow, it might be something like humanoid robotics, because that's kind of like been going on for a while, and there's a lot that you have to like understand in terms of like theory sometimes to be able to like reason about problems in that space. So yeah, I'm kind of like shopping around. I try to keep it small, 3 things maybe that I fixate on. I have my little journaling thing that I do, where I sometimes reflect on these key goals that I have for myself. And yeah, the reflection is one thing that really helps for me with the journaling. And I do actively seek out like I have a coach or a mentor, I don't know what you call it, that I do like regular sessions with, to just be like a clunk board.
So these and that's how you go about achieving your goals.
Exactly.
So the journaling
keep me on track. Sometimes they challenge, like, what the hell are you doing? Like, the scoping down of things is another tool. Like, probably these 3 tools, right? Like talking to peers, having them like throw the shit at the wall and see what sticks. I journal, so I reflect on these things, and very often I realize, like, what am I really doing? And I scope things down. I try to scope things down quite a bit. So very often I have these ideas of, oh my goodness, this is what I would like to do. Yeah. And then I just have to go like, what is 10% of that? And then it sucks, but that's kind of like a good baby step. I'm constantly telling to people that work with me, like, baby steps, baby steps. It's getting almost pedantic now, but it kind of like helps me at least.
And then, so reviewing, and then also sharing this probably with your, like, is it a coach or is it like a sparring partner?
Yeah, it's like a coach. Like, they basically offer services to just sit with you, and they are like, this is one that is familiar with like the mostly specialized in the technical leadership domain, so they know frameworks and like methods that I can apply. So I don't have to always like find these things on the internet myself. Sometimes they're like, hey, by the way, there's a framework for this, just apply it. So that really helps. I talk a lot to people, so it's not just the mentors. I'm a bit of an oversharer, so it kind of like helps me in the sense that people hear these things and then they either connect the dots or they give me like some input. Yeah, that really helps me.
Yeah.
All
right. So, and what are you currently working
on? So currently I'm the associate partner at the technical due diligence firm. Yeah, so that's what I'm focusing on. I have another project, my 9-month-old kiddo. That's my biggest project right now. Sleep deprivation is real, so like I don't have a lot of other things going on. I'm doing a bit of a refresher on my fundamentals in machine learning. So I bought a recent good book, and I'm kind of like trying to deep dive through it and trying to recall some of these ideas that I knew once upon a time that don't stick as well anymore. So I'm trying to prepare myself to be more active in that domain. And I would say those are the key things that I'm focusing on right now.
Yeah.
Also getting
so. With regards to due diligence, I mean, we've talked about this topic and what it's like to people. It's a bit like insurance, maybe, but it is relevant, especially if an investor goes and is thinking about investing millions into a startup, right? Mm-hmm. You want to make sure that there's no risk or lower risk, especially with these AI startups that are sometimes just
wrappers
and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, from my understanding, what you do is you take these startups and you hold them against the light and you look at them and into their code base.
Exactly.
And tell like, okay, this is a wrapper, or this is worthless, or this is very interesting.
Yeah. Kind of like that. I think it's a good characterization of what goes on there. So very often there are different contexts in which this happens. Sometimes investors have already made up the decision that they want to invest. So it's sometimes more of a fiduciary thing, like a checkbox type of thing. Sometimes they are not fully clear on what is going on and they need someone to translate it to them. That's another case in which it happens. And almost all of the cases, our job is to come up with actionable recommendations for the company to implement if they choose to. So a side effect of doing kind of like a good due diligence would typically give you a list of a couple of things you can drop on your roadmap to just make your company better.
So it's actually helping the startups as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Otherwise, what's the point of it? I would argue. I think it's only really useful if it helps the startup advance. That's helpful for the investor, regardless of whether they invest, because it helps the ecosystem it's helpful for the startup.
Further along the line that they still invest.
Exactly. Yeah. And for the startup, it's immediately useful because now they just have a couple of things. Sometimes they already are aware of these things, but just through this exercise, it's like sitting at a therapist and sometimes knowing you do certain things, but just talking about it, you realize like, why am I not prioritizing this? Maybe I should think about carving out some time to just take care of this thing because it may help me down the line. So it's often kind of like almost like an accidental therapy session of sorts where we kind of like help them figure out like, hey, what are you doing here?
Yeah. Makes not much sense So how this principle, right? So I compare it to always like to me it resembles like insurance. You just want to spend a certain amount of effort or time to look at something that like a step you're going to take to de-risk it. Like you always want to do something like how can we take the risk out of owning a car, but also investing millions into a startup.
Sure.
And of course you don't want to spend more than the risk, right? If the car insurance is like crazy expensive, the all risk, for example, you decide not to do it, right? So how does this go with, in your case, but also like how can founders apply this like to the risks that they run in their businesses?
So the whole principle of the whole due diligencing thing. So I mean, like due diligence doesn't have to cost you. You can time box, as we said before, you can time box anything, right? So it's just a question of scope. Sometimes you can just decide that we need like a cursory check on whether this is sensible. Sometimes you may have to decide, sometimes you will decide that we really need to try to get to the bottom of it. So we will pick everything apart to try to understand what is really there. Like different companies in different stages get different things. So for an early stage company, like we don't even have to spend too much time looking at code because all of that will likely be thrown away anyways, right? We're looking at the team. We're kind of like looking at how they think about architecture. Are they aware of like best practices?
There's multi-levels.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do you look at a team?
Well, so typically we have conversations. We understand how they think in terms of like leading teams, like how they think in terms of hiring, how they kind of like parse a landscape to be able to figure out like strategically what would be important here, like, so we can understand how they make trade-offs, like build versus buy decisions, or like how they position themselves in the market when there are so many opportunities to kind of like capture, and it's you kind of have to make choices. Like we try to see where they are at. Like if people are like, we want to do everything, it's kind of like semi-red flaggish, right? You're going to find out.
Is this then the good part of your job? This sounds like super interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like figuring out how a team works.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Much more interesting, I guess, than looking at the code base. Or
it's both. It both has its charms, right? Yeah, I think both. I think the combination of both is the real fun part, because like you get to look into companies that are building like agricultural robots, and you get to find out how they're doing it. And sometimes you get to find them. You find that they do things that are really weird sometimes, and sometimes things that don't really make sense. And sometimes you can contribute ideas because we've seen more than they have in many regards. Like maybe they've been a lot deeper on these areas, but we've been a lot broader. So we can give them like insights into like, have you ever heard of this toolbox? And they're like, we've been implementing this from scratch. We didn't even know it existed because we didn't know what terms were to use to search for this thing, right? So these things happen so often, and that's the fun part, where people can see the magic and they're like, oh my goodness, you're starting to help me. And the same applies on this whole like the meta layer of like the team, where you talk about like, have you thought about this trade-off? And then they realize like, oh, actually, no, we haven't. Is that something we would have to think of or about? And then you have this conversation together, and I think you get to learn how they tick. And that's basically what's really interesting when you're looking at like teams of like founders or young startups, is to get a sense of like how they dance together. And typically you only get that sense by kind of like immersing yourself into the situation and like poking it out.
It sounds like it can be like hugely beneficial for the founders. Because they get like basically somebody peeks under the hood and then they get shown a mirror. But the investors pay for it, right?
It depends. We've seen multiple scenarios. Like sometimes the investors pay for it. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. It really depends on how the fund is structured. Like sometimes they basically pass on the bill to the startup and then basically gets discounted from the ticket. So there are a lot of different.
The investors typically hire your company, right?
Yeah, so basically they mandate that there is a due diligence, and then they may the subject or the startup may have to pay for it. But it also happens that the investor themselves pays for it.
Is there anything that a founder like who's in a startup who is raising money and sees, okay, there will be a due diligence, is there anything that they can do to prepare?
Oh yeah, absolutely. A lot of things they can do to prepare. So like, I mean, like you can do a dry run, which is like almost like a real due diligence with another company. You don't know who will be the party who does your due diligence sometimes. So you can sometimes just prepare for the process by having someone else just run you through the drill.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is here actually, in the preparation is often about how do you set up your organization to be more robust, to be able to grow, or to be able to like fend off competition. A lot of this is about processes because, of course, the team is interesting, but people can drop off the map for happy reasons or sad reasons, right? So for the investor, like, yes, sure, the founders are really interesting, but if anything happens to the team structure, is there still something there? Or like, can I imagine them kind of like pivoting into a completely different domain, if that's not a team problem, but more of like a market fit type of thing. So there, I think there's like plenty of room to just either talk to peers, get some insights into what they're doing differently, maybe get some criticism on what you could be doing better yourself, do a dry run or a health check, which is something that due diligence companies offer.
What would be a health check?
Would be us running a formal due diligence process on you, but you are the client.
Oh, yeah.
So then we sit with you, we kind of like figure out what are your guiding questions. Sometimes you're like, I'm trying to sell to the investors that we're going to scale 10x over the next year.
Sure.
I want to know if we are in the right position or have the right posture to make that happen. And then we will just come in and just find out all the things that basically present something that is a risk signal that they can then address.
And does this happen? Like, do you meet startups that you instantly know they've had a dry run or a health check? And then are they more successful?
In the fundraising process?
Yes.
Yeah, because it takes time, right? The whole fundraising process takes time, and just being prepared like makes the whole thing go a lot smoother. Like it
do you notice like when
yeah, sometimes you do notice because like we ask like certain documents. It's not always the same that we ask for, but there are like most companies have like, if you ask a company for their org chart, they typically can produce it relatively quickly. Sometimes companies can't because they're poorly organized, right? But you typically need to be able to just quickly pull it up. If you can't, then probably you should be using some HR tool, right?
Yeah.
And just not think about it. Like things like that, when you realize that they have all of these things ready quickly, you know that they've at least been through some process where they thought about, oh snap, someone may ask for these things.
Yeah.
Do I use a tool now to make this easier, or do I just document it and update everything right now somewhere in a G doc or a G drive? Like whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. But just seeing that they are quick on their feet to deliver tells you often that they've kind of like been through it before, which is good for them because it reduces the process. Like it might be taking 2 to 3 weeks sometimes to complete the due diligence, and sometimes people are waiting to go to the notary until they have the result of the legal due diligence, the commercial due diligence, and the technical due diligence. Yeah. And if we can get ours like out of the way quickly, then you can just focus on building again. That's another thing. These founders, for the time that they're fundraising, are often distracted from building, which is what you really want to be doing.
Yeah.
So if you can prepare better and maybe manage the time more optimally when you prepare these documents, then you can focus on just keeping the machine going.
Yeah, they have a limited amount of runway as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow. So so when they are prepared, of course, everything becomes a little bit easier. And you now have this position. You're doing quite well for yourself, but I can imagine. I met you 11 years ago, 12 years ago. You've also probably run into some stuff, right? So I want to talk about you and like, what is a challenge that you faced? Like, what is one of the biggest challenges you faced, and how did you overcome it in this journey to where you are?
I feel my biggest challenges are mostly people challenges. Like, it was less about other things than it was about people. Like figuring out how to split up with people you've been working with before, for example, is a very classical one of those things that is really hard, especially if you want to preserve the relationship. And I think that is like I'm really poor at optimizing for wealth, which is also why I'm not wealthy, right? So I've really optimized well for relationships.
We should talk more.
Yeah, we should talk more. Yeah, like I'm also not a great salesperson, so like I'm not the person who's just gonna accumulate like exorbitant amounts of wealth. But somehow I've been okay at like cultivating and kind of like tending my little garden of people around me that I really love, that I go through like weird episodes with, but we kind of like come back from that. I think that was hard for me in many cases because sometimes we would have been founders in the same company and we kind of have to have these hard conversations. And sometimes you have to go through mediation for these things, and that hurts and it sucks on every level. And you sometimes don't even see where it's going towards the end. But I think those are things that I feel were really hard and stressful, really stressful for me. But I'm happy that I somehow got on the other side without burning bridges.
Yeah. You're still good with everyone, right? As far as I can.
As far as I can tell, yeah. Like I don't really have enemies. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing. Again, from a business perspective, I think a lot of people that build like really cool businesses have plenty of enemies. So there seems to be some correlation there. So I don't know if I should like change my optimization function.
I mean, no, you wanted to stay good with the people you worked with, which makes sense because you worked with them because you love them.
Exactly.
I presume.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, I have people that I don't want to be in a room with again.
Okay.
But that's because, things didn't go as planned, but they weren't friends when we started either.
Yeah,
So that's,
okay.
I think that's, if they are or were, then you might want to put in the effort and the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
Yeah. So I mean, like that, if there was anything that I would characterize as hard, it was almost always on the people level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. The fiscal stuff.
But are you happy that you put in the work?
Yeah, I'm happy that I put in work. If I reflect back, I don't regret not optimizing for money over people. I feel that's a good choice for me at least. But sometimes I do challenge myself. Like I run this thought experiment. Like, shit, if I do want to kind of like do certain things, like I kind of like have to change parts of my strategy. I wonder because I struggle with that sometimes. Like I feel like sometimes I'm a little bit of a I don't know. Like I'm sometimes too friendly in some regards and maybe not stern enough or whatever. Like, I don't know, like it's probably not important anyways. Like I'm just modeling what I see from like sharks, right? Like sharks, they have certain characteristics, but they have crazy amounts of money and they build businesses and, you know, they sue each other and then they maybe they come back together again 5 years later. Maybe they never like reconcile. I don't know.
Wait, so what is your thought of this? You think that they are happy doing that or?
I think different people have different objective functions, and some people are happy doing things that I may not understand. So,
but you have the idea that you might be a little bit too flexible.
I think I am quite flexible. Maybe not that. Sometimes I am just frustrated at myself when I look at myself from kind of like the outside lens. I'm like, David, why aren't you more like that? Doesn't necessarily mean that it would be better if I were like that, but you kind of like are curious, you know? Like if I were a bit more like cutthroat, like how would it be? Like,
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it makes sense, but also at the same time, I think, sometimes I am like that, but it's not what makes me happy.
Okay.
So
okay, that's an interesting. It's a single anecdotal data point, right?
Sure.
It's information.
Yeah. I think you need to be maybe a little bit of a psychopath. If you like
a narcissist / psychopath, then you get certain things done, right? Which is
but you can still get things done whilst being likable, and I think that's probably.
Do you think so? I think there's a bit of a contradiction. I think there is a space of things, like a domain of things that you can get done being a likable person, and then there's this other domain of sometimes crazier things on some metric, right?
Sure, yeah.
That are almost intractable if you're too much of the likable person, because you have to kind of like you have to win a couple of battles, and you need to be pretty cutthroat to win those battles. Otherwise, you don't even get there.
Example.
I think
I understand you, but like
I think Jobs.
Yeah.
Great product mind, right?
Yeah.
Built one of the coolest companies in the world.
Sure.
Was pretty difficult to work with. Musk. Notoriously difficult to work with.
Yeah, true.
Bezos might also be a bit of a challenging person to work with, right? Like if you hear the stories about Gates, also challenging person to work with. And you read the stories about Zuck, and you're like, oh snap, shit went down. Like that wasn't always cozy. That was sometimes pretty rough. And I think sometimes you just need to be able to like walk into the ring and just collect a couple of bruises in a way that other folks might not be comfortable doing, because they want to preserve something that others don't care so much about preserving, right?
Sure.
So, yeah. Wow. I think it's
you
not a judgment,
might be right,
right?
But I think that these people could still be likable. There's a lot of people who think Elon Musk is crazy, but there's also a lot of people who think he's a very cool dude.
Yeah.
So it's yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I think that there are a lot of people that think that Musk is a very cool dude. Would they work for him?
Yeah,
That's a different thing.
I think
that's
that's
is someone likable at a distance when you have no interaction with them and you can just kind of like consume their content, or are they just genuinely pleasant people to be around?
Yeah.
Like, and maybe they're pleasant people to be around on the productivity front when you're working together and you're like, this dude is brutal, but we're grinding, and this is brilliant. Yeah. But beyond that, you're like, but if I have my own time, like I would rather avoid this dude at all costs, for example. Exactly. That could also be something like pleasant could be on different metrics or features. Like it could be on like working with, could be on like spending personal time with, could be on like, would I call you for help if I really needed some support? Like it's not a judgment call. I think there's just people for different things. And I am more of the person for things that I feel are more like relationship optimization stuff. Yeah. Probably not yet the other thing, but I am thinking about how to bridge the gap.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That having said, quick question is like, so what's next for you? Like if that's like, if you're thinking about that and like, so do you have like?
I have like currently I'm working on kind of like, I've done a lot of due diligence work and I love that. I am trying to deep dive into the machine learning topic again. Yeah. Just kind of making sure that my knowledge is current. I am trying to deep dive into product because I feel that my intuition there isn't always as strong as I want it to be. I know some of like the best practices. I read plenty of the books, but applying it sometimes is a different game. And I even joked with some investors about it where they're like, founding is really hard. Like I can kind of like read founders and kind of like make an assessment on whether I should give them money or not. Not sure if they know how to pick winners per se, but that's a different topic. But like they recognize or acknowledge that like being on the ground as an operator, building things and making the right calls, making data-driven calls is not always trivial. And I find for myself that sometimes I struggle with that, where you have this idea and you kind of like get lost in kind of like emotionally being attached to the thing, and you forget to kind of like systemically navigate the field and just figure out, okay, how do I de-risk this, and just do the few things that are necessary to get the maximum yield. And this is one thing where I just want to practice more. So
in setting up like a system, or like what do you mean?
So I'm basically kind of like setting up a system for myself again, where I'm trying to build little things now. Yeah. Trying to get my hands dirty, just getting my hands on the whole engineering thing again, but scoping it down, doing the hard work of figuring out what's really necessary, figuring out how to have efficient calls for kind of like discovery and user research or something like that. Exactly. Like those things are things where I feel like, yeah, surely technically I feel like I can implement a bunch of things, but the technical thing is always in service of something else, right? Yeah, exactly. And if the product strategy or product vision doesn't make sense, then it doesn't really matter what the technology under the hood is. Like, so I feel like I now need to walk up the stack to like develop my skills there, so I can also start building more things that have better chances of succeeding, given all this insight that I have about like how to build tech well, how to do product well, but now applying it is different to the theory, right? So now I have to build that muscle to just go into the field and just naturally do the right things instead of like having to overthink it.
And the great thing is you already know all the investors interested in anything you might build.
I know plenty of investors, so that's I don't know if it's an advantage. I don't know.
But you're in the field, so you're
I'm in the field, so you have a read on what's going on left and right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice you would give to others? That might be like your past self when you were just tinkering along, like 3D modeling with code. When I saw you on your computer, I was like, "What are you doing? Making a 3D model with some?"
Yeah, I did plenty of that stuff.
You know, you did all-nighters, right? At the moment, you also do all-nighters.
Yeah,
but that's like it's a luxury position that you have a kid and that they're able to take care of her.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like back then, when you were young, you did all-nighters just to figure out what you wanted to do. Like, what advice would you give that person?
I honestly, if I look at what happened now, even though I may like meccan or complain about like not being so cutthroat enough, I think it was the right set of calls, because like in the grand scheme of things, like how I ended up trickling through the universe and then ending up with Leni and then now where we are, I think that's actually a perfect setup, and kind of like the lifestyle that we can enjoy is kind of like good. Maybe I'd be a bit less generous in terms of like, you know what, I've often had when I was a lot younger, like 50 different people approach me with ideas and like, oh, let's try to implement this, blah, 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 blah. And me just being this naive little kiddo, just doing it for the experience, right?
Sure.
I think it was good to like develop my skills, but I think it also makes sense to be a bit more tactical about that and kind of like narrow or focus your energy better. So I probably would have focused my energy a bit better. Maybe pick like, maybe even optimize for having like maybe a stint at a big name for a short while, you know, because that sometimes helps your career, even though maybe you shouldn't be optimizing for these things. You know, sometimes now I feel like, what if I had tried to apply for like one of these like big title FANG-like jobs and just done that for a year or two? Like things like that, I would recommend myself to like do maybe little focus stints instead of like this kind of like laissez-faire. It wasn't laissez-faire because I was grinding, but I always wanted to be this free agent.
Yeah.
Like, I also have a problem with authority, so I have mental things going on. So like
people do.
Yeah, like so I optimize a lot for like no one tells me what to do, which is probably coming back from the tribes that I stem from. So yeah, well, they fought and they didn't like authority figures either. So like, hey, here we are. So I want to tell myself partially it's nature.
Well, I think it could be, but I think pretty much like I feel the same. So
yeah, and sometimes you just roll up the sleeves and you do the hard thing of just sucking it up, right?
Yeah.
And
is there anything else that you like to share with people other than like it's okay to have problems with authority?
I didn't say it's okay to have problems. I just said like I have that. No, I don't have so much to share necessarily. I think we've kind of like covered a good amount of topics. I think talking to people and that maybe the one thing I would say like, folks, like I still encounter plenty of people that are not talking about their ideas because their ideas are so magical. And in the end of the day, like I think the execution thing that is just far and beyond. And like just focus on getting the right information, talking about things quickly, early, and not just hoarding something that you think necessarily is like the holy grail, because often it's not all that you think it to be, right? So I think that is one thing where I'd be like, folks, just do less of that. Just do more also talking. Collaborating. And this maybe is where my relationship optimization strategy comes into place. More collaboration. Like, why are we constantly competing? Why can't I only be the winner? Why is this winner takes all thing? Like, maybe Thiel would kill me for that one. Not kill me, but Thiel does believe in like monopolies, right?
Those are like the crazy kills principle, right? You can collaborate with anyone. Like, don't be afraid that they will steal anything. Or
if they steal it and they out execute you, then the world has still won, right? Because this thing is out there and people are. And
you would have lost it anyway.
Yeah, you would have lost it anyways. And this is probably like when you get punched at the gym and then you realize, okay, next time I have to defend myself that way. And then you learn from it. So then I in my head, I just have this sense of like, I have to run my 100 experiments and one of them might work really well. Yeah. And I don't know if that 100 happens on the 5th try or on the 95th try. Right?
No, but your process gets better. Because of the 100, like and
on my way to the 100,
it could be none of the it could be none of the hundreds, but then you have a stellar process,
which would be a very shitty outcome. I have to admit, I would not.
I would not
be grateful for like, I have learned something.
But my assumption, is that at least 5 to 10 would be solid.
Yeah, I would hope so. Like, I would really have a problem if neither of them work out. Then maybe I shouldn't be in this line of work, right?
True.
Yeah.
All right. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you or your work?
I'm on X. I'm on GitHub. I'm on IG. I'm on Twitter's X.
Vidbina, right? Is your handle?
Vidbina is the handle. Last 3 letters of my first name. Last 4 letters of my last name. Pretty easy to remember. Pretty much every platform that is out there that I use, at least, I have the same handle. So LinkedIn, GitHub, X, Twitch, YouTube.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was really fun.
Yeah. So this was Making Progress. Thank you for listening.
All right, let's make progress.